have you. I think this is going to be really cool.
No, appreciate it very much, Aaron. Appreciate the time and having me come back. And just a little quick background about myself. Sean MacCarthy, head of analytics and segmentation at Claire's. I've got my head of analytics over in our UK office joining us, so I don't know why he's not asleep, but he decided to show up here. That was not mandatory. It's funny, as Aaron pointed out, I came from an academic background as a philosopher and teaching at universities, and the came down to practical reasons why I'm not anymore, right? It's you start having kids and having to afford them. Well, let's just say the professor in liberal arts salary isn't all that it's cracked up to be, and so you can make more doing math. And so for very practical reasons, I was able to find a corporate gig because even though I didn't have a explicit business background or anything like that, I was fortunate enough to get hired by someone who likes taking people who know how to think. But I can't teach anyone how to think. And so it was very important that he found people that could do that. And so I wasn't the only one in the team that was like that. Quite a few others from various backgrounds, but everyone had to know how to think and solve problems. And so, taking that, it just so happened that my career got guided toward very heavy into analysis, statistics, and problem solving in that way. It wasn't a direct introduction to statistics. I actually did it through a bunch of Lean Six Sigma training. I had calculus and all those types of things and linear algebra back in school, but the statistics side I didn't do at all until I got introduced to the Greenbelt stuff and doing the Six Sigma training, and that was fantastic. And then once it took off from there, I mean, that's the great thing about the time we live in. For as much as is awful on the internet, there's a whole lot of learning on the internet that's free. And so the ability to brush up and find out and Google your way out of problems is incredible. And so that's how it really started. And then it was just one mentor and one boss after another who was very highly analytical. Everything always had to be proven out, tie back to numbers. And the thing that I think helped me in my career especially was it had to tie back to numbers, but it had to be practical and applicable to the business, right? So you couldn't just do numbers for fun. You had to do the numbers because you were going to actually impact the P&L. You were actually going to impact the bottom line or the operational improvement you were trying to drive at. And so, we started out at Sears a long time ago when Sears was still the fifth biggest online store, when Sears was still a $40 or $60 billion company at the time. Then I went to Walgreens, the second biggest W in the world, where I got to do a lot with supply chain and big data and get introduced to that side of analytics. We had all that at Sears. Like, that was the amazing thing about Sears is some of the most mature and impressive systems and processes I've still seen to date in any retail company. And so I went to Walgreens, got to do big data and the supply chain analytics there, and then got an opportunity to come to Claire's where I had the chance to do analytics across the whole spectrum of our retail operation and business-to-business operation, and also had the benefit of working on the European market, which was just a totally different consumer market, and so a lot of fun. And so, that's how I ended up where I am today, and just been very fortunate, again, to have leaders who everything was driven by the math, but the math always had to be practically applied. There was no math just for math's sake.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I think, I'm one of those people, and I don't know if I'm just a weirdo or other people like this, but I used to really despise math in high school, and part of it was for, that specific reason, and that's why I didn't realize, I could do data, I could do things that involve math. Then I discovered Excel, and it was kind of downhill from there, and, you kind of go down the rabbit hole, and you're like, I can actually connect this back to the business and make an impact, and I'm a business junkie. So for me, it's like, this is actually really cool. And had they actually shown me this, like as a 15-year-old Aaron, I would have probably had a different career path. But with that, I think the easiest place to start is to talk a little bit about like the kind of work that you do at Claire's, like at least at a high level, what it means to do, analytics for a big retail company. Because I think that's, like, it's huge. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of, I think, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think the fortunate thing about Claire's is it's big, but it's small at the same time, right? And so, whereas a lot of retailers, you're going to be a data scientist and you work on maybe just the targeted marketing algorithm for the email, and that's your whole job is to continue to refine and make it dance in a way that no one else before you could, or to continue to make it dance as your consumer behaviors change, and you got to. We deal with the pricing and the promotional strategies. We deal with all of the root cause analyses of why is this happening in our business right now. Where's our next opportunity? What's the big risk? As we expand our loyalty program, we just kicked it off in November, so the data is very nascent. But as we continue to grow that loyalty program and we start really accumulating more first-party data and being able to match that up against third-party data, we're going to be able to provide a lot of great insight to our leadership to drive our strategy, because we're growing. That's another wonderful thing about where we are positioned right now. We are growing like crazy, despite the circumstances of the world not wanting to let a lot of retailers do that these days, especially traditionally mall-based retailers. We're one of the few who are actually growing, and it's phenomenal. And so this loyalty program is going to just help continue that growth and point it in the right direction, and at other opportunities we haven't been able to take advantage of yet. And so but we do supply chain work. We help LP loss prevention figure out what's going on with counts and when we have issues, and we're helping the IT team with the whole data migration right now. And much thanks to my manager in the UK. Who did something similar at Tesco a few years back, and so he's helping the IT team, because again, that's one of those things where just like data scientists and data folks like us, where we can really geek out and get disconnected from the business because we're having so much fun geeking out. IT can definitely disconnect from the business, and I built what you put in the requirements, technically speaking, and so I delivered your project, but you didn't deliver anything usable to me because we were talking past each other the whole time, because I was saying this as a business person, you were saying this as a technical person. We thought we were saying the same thing, and we weren't at all, right? And so helping them with that migration in order to bridge that gap, because it's a very real gap, just like when we try to talk to our business, and they say, well, I've got a this problem, and we start looking at the math, and we're like, you don't have a that problem, you have a this problem, and it's not what you thought it was. So really all those things, I'm very fortunate. Again, big company, small company at the same time, that I get to put my hands in all of that. Whereas at a traditional retailer, you might be in one group, one business. Not that you're not doing great things, but the fun thing about what we do is we've got to keep it all connected in our heads, and that helps us serve our business better, because we realize, wait a minute, we could do all this math that solves this problem, but the upstream process that would allow us to change the physical universe based on that math isn't mature enough yet to handle what our outcome is. So what's the next best thing to actually get action to drive a different result today or tomorrow, as opposed to 6 months from now when they finally get the system in place to make a change, right? Those are the types of challenges we face all the time. Is that what you're looking for, Aaron, hopefully?
Yeah, that definitely answers the question. I mean, one of the things that I find super interesting is when you mentioned bringing on board the loyalty program, just like, how you go about, launching something like that. And, because I think back to when COVID first hit, and all of a sudden we had, a lot of new data that came in, right? And, a lot of numbers that looked very, very different, and people wouldn't know what to do, because it's hard to compare this against. You don't have like for like figures. So consumption in one thing went up significantly, but it's like we looked at a paradigm shift, right? I'm super curious how is it like kind of a similar kind of thing for you guys, and all of a sudden you have this new information and you're like, oh my God, there's this stuff that's really important, or is it kind of confirming kind of some of your original hypotheses and like that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think the whole time COVID was happening, we were in the throes of the worst parts of it, and my poor European colleagues are still in the throes of some of the lockdowns, although I think we're only at like 3 stores not open anymore in Europe, whereas a month ago it was still, a couple hundred. So we're very fortunate that Europe's finally opening up. So hopefully their health trends continue that direction, so that they can be free once again. But yeah, for us last year and at this time, it was everyone wanted an answer, but our loyalty program didn't launch till November, so we had no customer data. So I couldn't tell you what was different and why. But having been at Walgreens, where you had one of the world's largest loyalty programs, if not the largest, in terms of just raw numbers, I think they're at like 75 million or something crazy. I know exactly what I would have been asking of the loyalty teams. Because we could very quickly see, to your point, that difference in behavior very quickly between, okay, this demographic, pre-pandemic shopping, post-pandemic shopping. Are we recovering them? Are we losing them forever? Are we losing them for a couple months? What's going on?
Yes. Things, one thing that was super interesting, you mentioned Walgreens. I'm just forgetting. So when I got my Moderna shot, I forgot if it was Walgreens or CVS, but on the little pamphlet they gave you, on the back, it's they had the thing where it was like, oh, by the way, if you sign up for Walgreens Rewards, you get $5 off to spend a day. During the 15 minutes you have to wait to make sure you're not going to have blood clots or whatever it is. And for me, I'm like, oh man, they're probably not making money distributing the shot, but just think of how many people they've just signed up to their loyalty program, kind of by nature of doing this. All the new information they got, all the new customers they drove, just from one little thing that probably didn't seem that meaningful.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's the window into your world. Because one fortunate thing we did have is obviously Apple and Google made their mobility data public, right, at certain levels. So my team took a huge advantage of that, and they still do it today because thankfully they're still keeping it public as of this point. Right, they could take that away at any given minute, but that mobility data is huge because right now in Europe, my one head data scientist there, she just did an incredible analysis just showing how whereas in the United States the mobility is getting pretty normal, in Europe it's completely different still, and we're seeing it in our in our numbers, like a lot of retailers in Europe, and it's finding out how those markets have changed, and so you're seeing a lot of movement from the urban to the rural in Europe right now, and that's where the mobility is actually starting to get back to normal, whereas the urban markets haven't returned to their baseline pre-COVID yet at all, despite, of course, the majority of the population is still urban, right? But enough have moved out, and the behavior is still muted, such that the rural is improving in mobility while the urban is still hurting. And so those are the types of things that, again, I just have an incredible team, and that's one thing I've been very good at in my career as well, is as I've made it to manager levels and hiring people has been the key to my success. I'm not the smartest guy, but I know how to hire really smart people, and that's what's helped me most, is being able to do that.
Yeah, no, that kind of leads nicely into the next question point, but it's also one of the things that always baffles me. It's someone's a good manager when they actually, you can admit that, hey, I don't know everything, and I'm going to go hire someone who can actually help me do this, versus kind of people on the other end who just are afraid of the person they just hired. But so thinking about, we'll start at the bottom, kind of when you're looking for, a more junior level analysts for your teams. I have 2 questions. One, I'd say, what is there something that when you're looking through a stack of resumes, what's kind of mundane and normal and expected versus what's the thing that kind of makes you stop and say, oh, this is something that's interesting? And kind of tied into that, is there something that you don't think enough people are focused on now? Maybe they're one of those things where you're like, oh man, everyone has this, but right now, what's actually more important or more trending is this other skill set or mindset or what have you.
Yeah, no, good questions. For me, I think the most interesting thing is, and I know the world hasn't ticked over on this yet, I think it will eventually. I could care less about what school or degree you came from, right? If you can, on your resume, have a link that says, hey, go check out my Git, go check out my Tableau, check out my Python, check out I love baseball, so I made this predictive model for baseball. Go check it out, right? Those are the types of things that really get me to go, this person's really... Now, don't get me wrong. If I'm on Northwestern University's Retail Analytics Council board, right? So, like, no, I can go to the professors that are on that and go like, hey, who are your students that are awesome, right, that I can afford? That's the key one there, because I can't compete with Google. I'm retail. I can't compete with Google and Facebook for salaries or Apple, right? I'm retail. We don't pay that kind of money. So I'd say who I can afford. But that being said, when it's outside of those types of places, right, because maybe they don't have any students, they're mid-semester, those types of things, I think it's really that it's either they've got some passion for data science itself or data in itself, and it shows through personal projects with the Gits, with the idea, right? Because Power BI, Tableau, you can publish things for free. There are certain tiers that are, right, Power BI is fully free. I think Tableau, there are only certain tiers that are free.
Honestly, if you have an EDU email address, for anyone who's listening, you can actually go ping Tableau and get a free license.
There you go. So good note there. Shoot, I've got my grad student email still for life. I should take advantage of that.
You may prove that you're still an active student.
Darn it. There we go.
And the other one is a community college one that I'm sure I could use for a free license. If
there you go.
Please send me one.
So I think but those are great ways to show passion. The other way I think I see it is like, and this may sound weird, but like, if you're someone who's worked while going through school and lots of jobs or, those types of things like that show like you're just someone who's going to work their ass off. Even if, like, there's something about that just shows there's a diligence in you and a hunger in you that's got to be satisfied, right? And so that, to me, those are the two things that I think really stand out. If I don't have an already, hey, this is coming from one of my friends who recommends this person, it's coming from one of my boards and they recommend this person. If it were like this type of situation where it's just like a blind no, I got nobody in my pipeline, blind resume submission. Those are a couple of the things I'm going to look for. And then once I get you in the interview, it's going to be making you talk about those projects, hearing how you talk about them, and the detail you give about those projects. Because I want to know, were you the person on the team helping to write the code, or were you the person who didn't do that? And if I'm hiring a true data scientist or analyst where it's like, I need you to do the hard math, not me. Like, I got to know you were the one doing that, not just being someone in the master's program who was like on a team project helping out. And we can tell that from the way you're going to talk about the project and what, simple things like what libraries did you use and, things like that. And can you, if it's schoolwork, can you post it and can we look at it and review it? Those types of things are very helpful. So yeah, those are the ways like I look at that. And then from a skill set standpoint, I think some interesting. I mean, obviously, R and Python. If you have someone who's good in either of those, they're scripting languages. They can be good in anything. Mm-hmm. I've hired 2 PhDs who weren't strong in SQL before they got here, and yet they learned SQL without issues. Why? Because they were using R the whole time. Heck, the one guy, he wrote his own R library to do his dissertation, right? He had to in order to get the math the right way, so he wrote the library, right, that he ended up using. But like that's the kind of thing where it's like that ability to script, I think, is huge, because I think that goes to what you're going to find when you get to these companies, or if you're already in companies, you know it. Nobody has the perfect set of systems. Everyone's got some system that's just crap, or was designed and great for what it's designed for, but now you need to make it do something completely different it wasn't designed for. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is by munging a bunch of code together in a script that allows you to take what's a mess in that system, clean it up, structure it, spit it out into something that you can then do the math against, and then somehow return it to some other operational system or into a report. And I think that scripting skill set, people who have that mindset and that capability, You can throw them at Power BI, they'll learn it. You can throw them at Tableau, they'll learn it. You can throw them at SQL, they'll learn. Right, those are I think that type of scripting skill set in Python or R are very very helpful. To give you guys some real examples here, I want to know what all my competitors are doing all the time. Do you think if I go ask my competitors, hey, can you guys tell me what you're doing, they're going to send me a nice formatted data set, flat file? Here you go, ingest this in your database so that you can continue to crush us. No. What do I have to do? I have to get my guys to figure out how to scrape their sites, to figure out how to go after their websites and find out what's going on in them. And you think those competitors are constantly just like, hey, you know what, our website's good enough, we're never going to change a bit of code. So the first scraping algorithm you built was perfect and it'll last forever? Of course not.
Yeah. So one thing that's also interesting, I'm sorry to cut you off, but you had mentioned hiring PhDs. And so I know there's quite a few folks who come from academia and try and make that transition into data. And I think I was kind of curious, like, what you think, what do you think is the biggest, weakness or things to work on for most kind of academics to try and transition in, and kind of what the biggest differences are between like your PhD academic versus someone who is went through a coding boot camp or got a master's degree or what have you?
Yeah, so I think the big difference is, and I think this goes from PhD down to undergraduate versus someone who's like got actual experience being a data scientist for a company or an analyst. It's dealing with the realities of the dirtiness of the data in the real world versus, potentially in the... Now, science PhDs have a better idea about the dirtiness of data, especially like biologists, ecologist types, right? I think the reality of the dirtiness of the data and compared to certain academic disciplines, there's not big data in retail. I mean, there's big data for retail relative to what we think is big data. But if I'm a particle physicist, the number of measurements I have in a second is like a whole year's worth of data for a retailer, right? And so like it's those types of things where like getting used to how that is and being comfortable with, I've got to recast my mind in the math that I would use to work in ways that's not clean and precise or perfect anymore, so that I can actually drive business outcomes. And I think that would be the other side of it is, again, whether you're an undergrad or you're a PhD, the textbook examples you get in classes to teach you the theories, the concepts, and the how-tos are always so much cleaner than anything in reality. And often you don't have to do much of the, well, how do I connect the business purpose upstream to the business purpose downstream from this to make it actually usable for an end user? I just need to get this right on my paper or in my of it.
Yeah, and one of the things that always gets pointed out to me is you look at your data, the questions you ask your data, do I have everything I need? Like, what else do I need? What's missing? This kind of stuff. And if you do need something else, like, is it somewhere else in your company? How do you get that? How do you get a proxy? In your case, maybe it's, scraping someone's website, but, it's kind of like, I'm sure actually in everyone's case. But one question just came in from Bridget when she asked, how junior is too junior for an emerging data analyst applying for a role? Do you need to have, like, how robust of a portfolio of projects do you need? I think what the real question there is also is like, what makes a good project? Like, what are you supposed to have?
Yeah, I think a couple of factors go into that. I saw her comment on succinctness in business as well. Yes, remember I was a liberal arts academician, right? 5,000 words was short to explain something. So yes, succinctness is true. That's another big one. At least as you want to go to management level, right? If you just love the data and only want to be a nerd, you don't need to be succinct. You just code and be awesome at it, and you'll have a job. But to the question though, I think it depends on a few factors, right? And so of course the lovely answer of it depends. So salary is going to determine one of those things, right? How junior can you be? if I'm hiring a truly entry-level position and my salary I know is at the bottom end of the industry standard, I can go for, you've never been to school, but you've built a couple projects, posted them on Git, published them, you've worked, jobs, whatever they've been, right, summer jobs, and you come in and you're hungry as heck, I got no problem hiring you in a second. Why? Because if you can show me you can code and think and have that curiosity, and you fit within my budget, and that's the only budget I got, you are a perfect fit for me. And I face those situations, and that's how I've hired some people, and I've had incredible talent come through just by checking for those things. How hungry is this person? How curious? Can they show an aptitude for thinking and the math side of it? Right now, if I'm hiring super junior, I would not I would not expect that person to be like, I could give them the direction to say, hey, go build me a forecast for this product for the next 52 weeks based on history, and just let them run. They would need a lot of oversight as to, well, how do you build a time series forecast? Because maybe their thing was they built a project on predicting, I don't know, cricket scoring and things like that, right? And so that was their project, and so they've done a little bit of it, which shows the knack. Mm-hmm. But if my salary is low and all I can afford is the knack, not the know-how, then I will hire the knack every time. If as my budget increases, though, that's where the know-how is going to come in. And I think, to one of the things we were talking about beforehand, Aaron, is what is that difference between a data scientist who wants to be a data scientist and a data scientist who wants to manage other data scientists. It's that know-how is going to start with, on the analyst data science side, it's going to start very much on the technical side, right? What kind of mathematical technical capabilities do you have, coding technical capabilities? And that is, if you have a desire to grow your career path towards the management side, you don't just want to be the man and woman in front of the screen with the numbers. I just want to code. I love math. I love coding. I don't want responsibilities for other humans. Just let me do that. And there are people who are incredible and are great at that, and there are some that get paid very well because they're the ones writing the security algorithms, right? And that's what. But if you want to get hired, then those human know-hows come in. How do you lead a team? How do you guide people? How do you interact with other business people? I have stakeholders that want answers. They want them certain ways. This stakeholder loves pie charts for some ungodly reason. No one should ever love a pie chart. It's horrible. But they do, so I give them a pie chart. How do I work with those people? How do I interact with them to make sure all of their business needs they don't care how the math's done. They just care that the math gets them their bonus at the end of the day, whether they're the person on the shop floor or they're the person in corporate who manages the 10,000 people on the shop floor. They want to know how to win, and if I've got math that can help them win better, they want to know. They don't care how the math's done. Yeah. Not always. If it grates with their gut instinct, then they'll complain and say, show me the math, even though they don't get it, because they'll say, show it to me. But I think that's how you level up. I will hire for knack and hunger first if I've got low salary, and then as you scale that up, I'll add the know-how to it, whether it's technical and math know-how, the higher I go, or it's people know-how once you get to that manager level. So hopefully that it depends works.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, playing about pie charts, I was told you get one pie chart in your entire career because they're so terrible, use it wisely. All joking aside, pie charts are terrible. But, and one of those things where, I think that part about hunger is something you can't teach. Is either you have it or you don't. I love bootcamp students, coding bootcamps, data science bootcamps. I don't really care. You quit your job, you did this thing full time. You probably had a day job if you weren't doing it a full time bootcamp. So you learn stuff. Maybe you're not as hyper technical as someone with a 4-year CS degree or master of analytics or whatever. But there's something there, and to do both is really cool. Now you have to be good enough technically, and also ideally there's something else. And what I usually tell people is we had someone a couple weeks ago who was a lawyer, then got data science training, quit his job, and then now does data science work for law firms. right? So I think like it's nice to be able to acquire knowledge, but if you've already got it, I always tell people run to companies like that.
Yeah. I think that's great. You said something though that triggered me. I'll go on to the next question. It'll come back to me.
All right. So Ajay asked, how much? Well, you kind of just touched this, but we'll ask anyway. How much domain knowledge do you need to become a data scientist? And like, for example, in your case, like, is having a retail background important? And if so, I'll add like another caveat to that. If so, for you, is it just enough that maybe someone worked a retail job as like a part-time job in college? Is that like something that you're like, oh, actually, that's really helpful in what we do once you have the data skills as well?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's going to be very industry specific. Like for retail, honestly, I don't care if you've ever done retail in your life. I can teach you retail, right? Especially because every retailer you go to does it differently. And so we do retail this way. We use this accounting methodology. Our inventory is counted this way. This is how we look at sales. This is how we look at customers. This is how, right? Now, there are things that are always the same generically across those things, right?
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I can teach anybody retail enough such that as they're, so to me, I look more towards that technical, unless it's a senior role.
Sure.
Right? Because then I want someone who's already like, okay, you're going to be able to go meet with stakeholders and they're going to trust you. I don't have to be there to babysit. But for anyone who's analyst level, honestly, or a junior data scientist or what, no, I will gladly hire you out of whatever background you have because I can teach you the retail side. What I can't teach you is how to necessarily like, hey, I figured out how to, between, 3 different types of Bayesian libraries, I've got the one that's the most efficient if I'm running it, and for these these types of problems as opposed to these types of problems. Like I'm not going to be able to coach you through that very efficiently, but I can coach you through retail incredibly efficiently, so that you could apply those Bayesian methods to whatever problem we have and recognize, ooh, that problem is a good one for Bayesian. This one's good for nonlinear random forests. Right, like that's what I seek more. So I think from that perspective, whereas if I were going into the financial services industry, specifically looking at, like you're going to go apply for a job at Capital One on their credit approval or their fraud team, you probably need a high amount of domain experience, even as a junior person, with some familiarity of that, right? Now, there's always the catch-22. Well, how do you get it if you can't get hired, right? Like that type of thing. But retail is one that I think there's less, unless the more senior you get, obviously, the more they want domain knowledge, because obviously there are 10 other yous with that domain knowledge in the job market. So what makes you stand out versus someone who's already got that experience? Like that's where it's tougher. But junior level, I don't think it's as important.
Yeah, no, I agree. That makes sense. I mean, yeah, the way I see it is like if you have something, throw it on your resume, make it as part of your story, right? If the way I say it is maybe a little too bluntly. I'm like, don't be an idiot. If you're, applying for certain kinds of companies in certain industries, if you're applying for retail, go into Kaggle and pull retail data. At least,
right.
If you're going to do a project, try and direct it. Or like the example I usually use for people is, hey, if you want to work on the marketing team at Starbucks, right, go pull U.S. coffee consumption stats or something that's at least relevant to that stakeholder.
Yeah.
And we have another question from Milan about how do you use field learning to predict future trends? I'm not sure if that's a typo or not, but how do you predict like what someone wants to buy, a year out or 9 months out? I think you kind of touched upon this last time we talked. You were talking about some of the ML stuff that you guys do in terms of, I think you had to apologize for your deck having lots of like pink unicorns on it and stuff.
Right.
But if you kind of touch on kind of what that process might look like, if possible, that would be really cool.
Yeah, I think, one of the ways that's easily done is, again, as loyalty builds up, you get a lot of first-party data that says, I've got life cycle of my customer, right? So think about, and now don't take us because we've got a very nascent loyalty program, but take a grocery store where not only do you have a very mature loyalty programs in general, you have high frequency of transaction, right? Most people are showing up at their grocery stores once a week, if not more frequently, right? So they know a lot about you and your buying habits, and they have for decades, right? And they use that not just to spit out an encyclopedia's worth of coupons. For those in the audience, encyclopedias used to be printed and were a lot of, like, look at my bookshelf.
Yeah.
Like, that's how much paper, so that's the reference there in the joke. If you don't know what an encyclopedia is that's printed out.
If you're Gen Z, you probably don't.
Exactly. So, but yeah, so like that type of thing is, so what they do is they look at, are things certain, automatic everyday buys, or are things like builders that eventually grow into, various affinities for other things. And so you get that life cycle type of move, right? Mm-hmm. Bigger box retailers can see that over a life, where you'll see, like if you're a Home Depot, you can see, okay, this is based on their purchase history. They're probably a new homeowner. Mm-hmm. And then as certain things, they go, okay, now they've been in the house a while, and now they can predict pretty well, like, oh, they're probably going to start stuff breaking in their home because they've been a customer in this location, they continue to be a customer, and these are the types of things they've been buying, right? So those types of things, first-party wise, can be what's exciting about what's going on in social media, and this is what Aaron was alluding to with what I shared last time in a presentation, is that with what people are sharing on social media, there's a lot of opportunity to see where do people want to be, where do they aspire to be. So if you have that first-party access, right, on because they follow your company Instagram, or they follow you on Facebook and things like that, so you now have access to see who their friends are, see what they're liking, see what they're commenting on. Mm-hmm. You can now take that and scrape that to get where do they aspire to be. And by getting that, you can then, capture that and using neural nets on images, using natural language processing on the comments and the tags, you can then turn that into something. Again, it would have to be relevant for your industry or vertical. For us, our desire is, to look at trending. We have an incredible design team, and most of our product is our own design, right? So it's our designers, it's our buyers working hard to come up with the designs. Our goal is to look at, the public Instagrams of the world and use those to hoover up the images, scrape it. What are the color trends that are emerging? Because there are certain markets that are leading markets in fashion. And there are certain, and so you can use that to then say, okay, well, if South Korea does this, 6 months from now, New York does it. 3 months from that, LA does it, right? Like, you can build all of those relationships. And that way, even on basic things, not even sophisticated, like just color palettes, you can start working those types of things.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting being able to go through and build that kind of base case, right? The Home Depot example, and that works almost everywhere. Like at Best Buy, right? If you bought, I don't know, a TV, maybe then you want speakers, right? My favorite example of kind of data gone wrong is the Target example, where someone had purchased diapers and then they got an advertisement to their home, and their parents didn't know. Yep. So that's always a fun one. Emily asked, for you, if maybe just in general, is there a relationship between anything from philosophy or theories of philosophy into data? Not really sure, but
I mean, there are probably people who get really hyper specific with their disciplines and have found ways to write papers about that sort of thing. But to me, formal logic is probably the closest thing to having a direct. And sorry if you're hearing my door; it's my 2-year-old trying to break into the office and say hi. But it's formal logic to me, whether you're doing basic sentential logic, whether you're doing predicate or modal logic, to force your mind into those structures. That's exactly what computer code is. Right? At the end of the day, computer code is trillions of nested if-thens, ones and zero binaries that ultimately make these screens light up like they do and show me here right now. that I think is the best thing, because it forces you to think through problems in a very structured way in general in life. And when I got my Lean Six Sigma training, that was the amazing thing about it, right? When you were learning all the, you ask why 5 times, root cause analysis, they were all processes that I took to very conveniently, simply because I did a bunch of formal logic training as part of my studies, right? So I think that's a huge thing that ties. Ethics obviously has a lot of implication for what we do with data.
Sure.
But as far as actually answering business questions, I believe formal logic is probably the most useful thing. And somewhere back there, I've got Daniel Bonavac's Simple Logic. Unfortunately, it's out of print at this point, but you can get it used for pretty cheap. That's a really good basic introduction to both sentential and predicate logic, and does a very good job of just helping to form your mind. Just doing those problems that, like, if you love Sudoku, get a book like that, and you've got endless practice, and there are answers in the back, thankfully.
Yeah. No, it's funny you mentioned that. One of the things that I noticed back when I was working at App Academy were a lot of good applicants, people who were successful at transitioning from a different career, were lawyers, and people who had to do a lot of logic work for their careers, right? And so whether it's in software engineering, data science, or whatever, being able to do I remember taking the LSAT, and you had to learn the games, right? And so it was it's a bunch of if-ands, and you have to look at the problem, figure out where to start, how to build it out, how to have tests and work through. And obviously, it's different when you have to type. It's not. The thought process isn't that different. Then it's just a matter of how hard do you want to work, and do you really want this? And going through a 400-hour boot camp or whatever will tell you if you really like it or not. I mean, it's something that's there. Either you do or you don't. But here, Vishal asked a question in the comments here about how to capture seasonal demand using historical data, especially when you have future forecasts might change from people's interests or maybe stuff you see on social. But I don't know if that's something you can dive into.
Yeah, I don't have a specific library or a specific. I think the thing is you try a bunch of different algorithms. So here's the fascinating thing, right? Last year, COVID hits. Everyone's just like, what the hell is the world going to come back to after right? Because we're not essential, right? That dehumanizing, non-essential. Again, I could go off philosophically on that for a very long time. Yeah. But we were non-essential, and so we were closed for 3 months in most of the world, right? Then we got to reopen, and the biggest question was, what is it going to look like when we reopen? Well, we weren't able to predict anything meaningfully at that point because we had no data to say what it would be because we had no data. You're closed. You have no data, right? But as soon as we opened, my data scientists, the funniest thing was what they found was, and I know this isn't answering the question directly, but it's the seasonal patterns didn't move. The volume or the amplitude, right? So if you were to imagine the curve of seasonal demand in retail, right, with, bigger around Easter and right, that's the biggest part of your spring is Easter and some of those 3-day weekend holidays. And you got a summer surge with the retail we do because, school-age kids are out. And then you got nothing for a while, then you get Halloween and Christmas, and that's the big Q4 spike that all retailers love to see. That actually stayed exactly the same. And my one data scientist in England, she was able to predict the country week level within €1,000. Right? For countries that had only been open for a few weeks at that point, she was getting that good of results because trying nonlinear, trying linear, she found this harmonization between, I can't remember if it was a Nova or a Rima, but she found this nice harmonization that looked at certain things and then harmonized them with others, and it basically showed that if you map the seasonal curve back to what we had in 2019, before anyone knew our world was going to blow up, you got the same behavior, just different amplitudes of waves and different days of the week because people weren't shopping on weekends as much because of, right? But otherwise, your week as a whole, so it was really fascinating. I think you've really got to play with those things, like nonlinear versus linear, and sometimes maybe map. You look for your amplitude with one and then look for your curve with the other and see how those things play out. It also depends on what kind of data you had. If I had a ton of loyalty data and customer data, I probably could have been much more accurate at predicting, seeing what customers were coming back after the pandemic versus what customers were still staying away. I probably could have started building models, but I didn't have any of that. So, but heck, we got within $1,000 per store within a country in a given week. It was amazing.
That's incredibly accurate. Well, I'm kind of curious. Where when people first started coming back, was there like were like the things people were buying, like, would that seem still like normal for like that time period, or like were you surprised that like the first thing people bought, like the first week your store was open and that sort of thing?
It wasn't product that surprised us in that way. It was that we're known for piercing, right? Most of all.
Yeah.
The amount of demand for piercing, and this is what, again, we have no consumer data, we have no survey data, so we can't confirm this. But as a father of 3 daughters, all I could think of, normalcy is ripped away from you for 3 months.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, normalcy still hasn't returned, right?
Yeah.
What's something very normal to give to a child? An experience like that. Our demand for piercing post-pandemic, we've already been on like a 10-year growth streak. It's outstripped that leaps and bounds, and it's been amazing. And I really think it is. We're normalcy. We are that bit of, right, aside from the missed birthdays, right, because it's often tied to that type of life event. So you have 3 months of pent-up demand. Mm-hmm. So you'd think that would peter out after, okay, everyone who missed their birthday now got their ears pierced for their birthday.
Yeah.
Nope, it just kept rolling. And people, so I mean, I'm assuming there are people walking out there with 50 piercings on their face given our numbers, right? Because it's just insane. But that's what, it blew us away in the store. Not just our biggest stores. We're talking stores that, they might have seen a few piercings in a week. They now see double-digit piercings in a week consistently, and it's just that kind of amazing thing that blew us away. Very excited because obviously for us, that's part of our right. That's part of our motto. We make memories.
Yeah.
I got video of my daughters getting pierced. My sister's got video of her daughters getting pierced. Like, everyone's got that moment in their mind of like, not me personally. I haven't gotten pierced. We did Scottie Pippen. We helped him out back in the day, but yeah. So it's
cool. I mean, for a Chicago-based audience, so except for your colleague in the UK, that's pretty awesome. It's super interesting because I mean, I think one of the trends that did come out was the kind of rush for comfort stuff. So it's like people were buying steaks, and like that kind of stuff, right? I mean, I was at Whole Foods the other day and I saw like, I've lived in Chicago for 3 years, never once saw a Tomahawk. Now I go there and you see these big, like, massive things, and I'm like, how the hell do you cook that? But, of course, prices go up, substantially.
Right.
Everyone wants it, and then, among other things. But it's one of those things that kind of that rush to comfort, or in your case, it's like that rush to feel normal and do things that are. I mean, I associate every mall I've been to with eclairs. My guys are pierced there. Everyone I know, like, high school, it's like, there are like 3 things you went to, right? And one of them was that.
That's right. We were in Stranger Things for a reason, Like,
yeah. And then last question that we have here before we let you go is so Greg asked what advice you'd give for someone with, I'm assuming based on this question, who's probably been working 5 to 10 years, kind of, someone who's already had a real job, real career, all that, kind of moving into that data space, and maybe not necessarily data scientist. Wasn't super specific. Greg, if you're still on, feel free to chime in here. But kind of, what advice do you have for someone at that level trying to transition into a more analytical career? And what I will say is on his tagline, it looks like he's in BI at, I can't tell her.
Yeah, so to answer the first question, you cook your tomahawk steak sous vide. You cook every steak sous vide. It's the only way to cook steak. And then you finish it on the grill or in the broiler. But I would say that for this, it depends on what type of roles you're going for. Mm-hmm. If you're going for the analyst level roles, I think what you potentially have to be prepared for is, again, depending on what you were doing otherwise, potentially a pay cut to be on, because there could be people who have just as many years in the industry and doing BI the whole time. But that being said, there could be, and there is, I think there really is a need for this, and more mature organizations are starting to see this. It's slow. It's a slow evolution. It started probably about 8 or 9 years ago. The idea of the storyteller isn't recent in the data space. The idea of having teams where you have storytellers that are more business interactive manager types, so they may not manage people, they may own processes. They may manage processes, or they may manage lines of business, where I don't need a hardcore data scientist. I need someone who gets the business, can be dangerous and dirty with the math when they need you to get some stuff out. But what they're going to be great for is they can go talk to business, and then they can go back to the nerds and talk to the nerds and say, hey, nerds, this is the business problem.
Yeah.
They think it's this, but I talked to them, and this is everything they told me. And by the way, here's all the data they have.
Yeah.
How do we think we can solve this? And then you tell me what you need so I can go translate that back to the business and say, hey, business, my nerds over here, they've got a really good idea. So it depends on the organization, because there are organizations who are much more mature and they have those roles where they are kind of like this. They're not a straight analyst. They're not a straight data scientist. They're not an operations person either. They're kind of a blend of all three. And if you're someone coming from more of that business side of it, I think if you're in an organization with those kind of mature structures, it should be very easy to slot in, because you could be someone who, you work with the hardcore nerds, you work with the data scientists who are going to do the crazy math and crazy coding, but you're good enough in SQL, you're good enough in Power BI or Tableau or Click or whatever it is. Not that you're going to produce the most magical things ever, but you're going to get stuff done, and and when you talk to the business, they trust you. They trust that when you bring something to them, it's going to be meaningful and it's going to actually help them, rather than you brought them something really cool numbers-wise that they can't do anything with, because you've got that experience. I think that's helpful. If you're not in an organization that has that maturity, the goal would be to then either convince someone, hey, I'm willing to go through whatever training-wise to get hardcore on the math and technical, because you don't have the blended role yet. Or you've got to look at another organization where they have that maturity and they can play that back and forth.
Yeah, no, and I mean, to your point, I think folks that have, I think the big push right now is like leave college, immediately go and try and get into a data science job. But I think what you're talking about, where you have like deep functional expertise, like if you're in marketing, go into marketing analytics, right? You know why you do what you do. And that's something that, right, business trust. Like if folks who are listening want to, or watching, I want to dive deeper into that. Harvard Business Review, as well as McKinsey, have written a bunch of articles on data translators. And, they've tried to kind of riff on the sexiest job in whatever year they posted it. So feel free to look for that, because I think, there are lots of predictions, but one of them is like, we need people who are that bridge between the technical people and the business people and the stakeholders. And the reality is right now, it's hit or miss, but if you can do both and you can do data good enough, there's a lot of opportunity to actually, to your point, get shit done. Because at the end of the day, like, I think what we forget is like why we do data, and we're all nerds, but the reality is like we're solving business problems, and if you can't do that, there's only so many roles that you're going to be able to actually do it. Look, you can be a hardcore data scientist and make really good money, but if you don't have that, lean into what you do have, which is like deep functional expertise. And I'll leave everyone with that, because I think it's a great point to end. Thanks everyone for coming. This is going to be recorded, so it'll be posted to our YouTube channel. I'll drop that in the chat. I'm also dropping my LinkedIn profile as well. If anyone wants to connect, feel free to do so. Also, here's our YouTube channel as well in the chat. This is where all of our events and recordings have been posted. So you can see last week's talk on data quality with one of the directors from Numerator. That was really cool. This one, once I clean up that very beginning part, will be posted as well. So really appreciate everyone's time. And